Many people struggle financially because of bad money habits that they may not even be aware of. These are habits that can really sabotage your overall financial goals and your progress towards them. I've spent my whole career working in finance, first as an accountant and then as an investment analyst. And what I really wanted to do was take some of the lessons that I'd learned when I was investing other people's money and apply them to my own finances. So in this video, we're going to be discussing bad money habits that are holding you back and how to fix them. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking, I've got really good money habits, but the truth of the matter is a lot of kind of common knowledge or, generally accepted practices can actually be quite bad money habits. So we're going to be diving into the detail and how you can fix them. Paying yourself last. Now, this is something that I came across in Ramit Sethi's book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And one of the things that he talks about in the book is this idea of paying yourself first. In the book, the idea is that most people will pay their bills, they'll spend whatever's left, and then any money that they've got left over will be money that they put into a savings account or money that they invest with. But the idea with paying yourself first is to completely flip that on its head and to basically invest first, then pay your bills, and then spend whatever's left. And I think once you flip this mindset, it can really open up all sorts of potential opportunities. Even if you're a bit strapped for cash, you can always seem to be able to find money to go to the pub or to go out for dinner. And actually, your brain will start to do the same sort of thing. Once you start paying yourself first, and then you pay your bills, and then you start to sort of live on what's left, then you find yourself in a situation where you'll just find those savings in order to make time for it. And that's because they're things that you want to do. I think this is a really key habit and really illustrates what I was just talking about. Lots of people think, well, I invest, but do you invest enough? And I think going through an exercise like this really sort of illustrates where your priorities are when it comes to money. You get comfortable with bad debt. Now, I've been really specific here and I've said bad debt.
Credit card debt, credit card debt.
One of the things you read about endlessly, Dave Ramsey talks about this a lot, is this idea of a debt hierarchy. Credit card debt is the worst, and then you've got sort of lower interest debt, like, personal loans, then you get car debt, and then you get all the way down to mortgages and then to debt free. And the reason why I've said being comfortable with bad debt is I'm not necessarily averse to debt, period. I think mortgages are obviously absolutely not the same thing as a credit card. But I think if you get used to the idea of, just as you've finished paying off one loan for one car, you sell it and you get another loan for an even more expensive car, that just doesn't make any sense to me. And I think this was something that we talked about in a previous video, link is in the description below, where it's this idea of debt being manageable. If you're in a situation where you can manage that debt, where it doesn't represent a large portion of your overall income over the month, then that's would be my idea of manageable debt.
Solvent, currently, debt-free.
And if you're constantly in debt, then it means you're in a situation where you're paying interest rather than potentially investing that money and earning interest. Focusing on saving over investing. This is something that they talk about a lot in Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which is a book I would definitely recommend if you're into personal finance. And one of the things they talk about a lot in the book is saving for retirement and saving to build your financial goals is just it's insufficient. We have another video, link is in the description below, about how the best course of action when you're building for wealth, particularly for your kids, is to start little and often and early. Let's be more specific though. I'm not saying you shouldn't have any savings. I'm saying you should have a bulk of savings. Your emergency fund should generally cover you for about 6 months of living expenses. And then after that, you should be investing. You shouldn't just be relying on saving. Basically, have an emergency fund and invest the rest, because that way you're beating inflation. The diagram on the screen illustrates it nicely. You see simple saving going pop, 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 pop quite slowly, and then you see the absolute rocket ship that is compound interest, which starts to go exponential the more time you give it to work and the more time it can be doing the heavy lifting for you. This is a concept that we explored in our most recent video, links in the description below, where we talked about how to make your kids millionaires. Leaving it too late. This is a fantastic passage from John Bogle's book, The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. Time is your friend when you're investing. The longer you invest, the greater your chances of success. Really, you shouldn't be waiting until you're 30s or your 40s before you start investing.
It's too late.
We also live in a world where the economic reality is that you can't necessarily just rely on your employer's retirement plan. You need to be making your own plans over and above that in order to retire comfortably. The key central premise in that whole video is this idea of compound interest. So one of the key takeaways from the video is that by starting investing early for your kids, as soon as they're born, as soon as you reasonably can do, you give compound interest more time to work. The more time you give it to work, the less of the heavy lifting you have to do, and compound interest can do the rest for you. So the later you leave it, the more difficult it can be in order to save and invest your way to financial success. Doing what everyone else is doing. This bit can sound a bit counterintuitive. The kind of common knowledge that we sort of talked about, the thing that makes the most sense is to do what everyone else is doing, to walk the path that is well worn. The problem is then you end up in a situation like everybody else, and so in all probability have an outcome that is the same or similar as everybody else. So if you want to find yourself being more financially successful, being more financially free earlier, or you want to have greater freedoms at around the same time, then you really need to be carving yourself a slightly different path.
I walk a higher path, son.
And that can be through a whole host of mechanisms. That can be having a side hustle, that can be starting a company, that can be just being smart with your money. In a lot of instances can be perfectly sufficient in order to get you there. This sort of links to the halo effect, kind of tangentially. It's not necessarily true to say that if you do the same thing as everyone else, you're going to kind of outsmart the system, you're going to beat the system. I think the key thing is to just do something slightly different earlier on. And a good example is something like overpaying on your mortgage. You know, most people make their mortgage repayments or they pay their rent and that's that. But if you're in a situation where you can overpay £100, a couple of £100 a month, then the interest savings that you will find will be absolutely astronomical. And so this is a really kind of basic but simple example that I think illustrates the point nicely. Then you'll have your mortgage paid off sooner, which is undoubtedly a nice feeling, but also, especially in this higher interest rate environment, saving potentially tens of thousands of pounds in interest repayments. So again, you're not veering too far from the well-worn path, but it's just enough to make a big difference in your life, especially when it comes to your retirement. Buying cheap but not where it matters. So often in this space, the idea is thrown around that all you need to do to be rich is be frugal and
Cheap?
You know, cut out everything that brings joy in your life. And I just think that's absolute nonsense. I think that's such crap. I think it's perfectly reasonable in some instances to abide by the buy nice or buy it twice principle. A good example is my car. I bought a cheap car and I thought it'll be fine. And I had it for about a year, conked out on me, cost me a fortune to get it fixed, and I wish I'd just spent a bit extra to get a car that was slightly newer and more reliable.
You've broken my car.
And so I guess my point is, you don't necessarily have to buy the cheapest of everything, but it's a really key skill to identify the things that are worth paying money for, that are worth kind of spending a bit more for to get better value, to get better quality. Work attire. You know, someone who is well turned out will generally always stand out. That means
I heard you dress well, Mr. Shelby.
buying nicely, not necessarily buying expensively. You don't need to go to a Savile Row tailor's to get a nice suit.
You're like a well-dressed wall.
But then zooming in on the finances more specifically, having a good financial planner, for example, who understands what your financial goals are, who understands your financial journey and all your financial circumstances, can be just such a boost. Like, it really feels like a bit of a cheat code to have someone who understands the tax code to make sure you're taking advantage of it. And again, make sure you're subscribed. We have a video coming out next week where we cover this exact topic but in way more detail, paying too much in tax. Now, this is sort of linked to my previous point about having an accountant or a tax advisor. You know, you might think that if you're on a PAYE that there's not necessarily any benefit to you having an accountant. And for most people that is generally the case, but I think a key thing is that lots of, and this is particularly true in the UK, lots of personal allowances are based on the income tax bracket that you fall into, and so making sure that you're allocating your money, particularly if you're married or if you're in a civil partnership, making sure you're allocating money between the two of you can be a really kind of key area to make sure that you're in a position where you're using the tax code to your advantage.
Tax-free.
The rich do it, so I would make sure that you're doing it as well. And just a really basic starting point, this is not necessarily financial advice, but if you're someone who's PAYE, maybe just have a no obligation chat with a tax advisor, with an accountant, and see if you can submit a self-assessment tax form. They may be able to point out some key areas, but if they find something which you can take advantage of, then it can more than pay for itself. A key one that we've talked about on this channel before is you pay tax on your gross income after pension contributions. So if you can make a pension contribution and it ducks you below a threshold, then that could be something that's worth doing.
He's the tax man, Kevin the tax man.
We covered this in a previous video, links in the description. It's the 5 steps to asking for a raise. And one thing I talk a lot about on the channel is how you really need to be actively managing your career and your salary, and not necessarily just accepting the average, you know, inflation adjusted pay increase. It's really going out there and making sure that you're getting the best salary that you can in your circumstances. So thanks very much for watching. This is Modern Money Talk, where we talk all things personal finance and personal development. If you've liked this video, please make sure you like and subscribe below. Comment below if you think there's anything that we've missed, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram. Peace out.